They shoved him to the floor, laughed as his dog tags hit the ground, and thought they'd won. But this helpless veteran, he once led missions so classified, the Pentagon still won't speak his name. And the second they knocked him down, he quietly triggered something they could never undo. 30 minutes later, Special Forces surrounded their bar. Why would elite soldiers risk everything for one injured old man? And when his past comes crashing into the present, who will survive what comes next? What secret is this quiet veteran hiding? And why is the government still protecting him? Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Seeing your comments really reminds me why I do this every day. The bell above Murphy's Diner's door chimed softly as Franklin "Tank" Broderick pushed it open, the familiar scent of coffee and bacon greeting him like an old friend. His weathered hands gripped his wooden cane as he made his way to his usual booth by the window, each step measured and careful due to the old shrapnel wound that had been his constant companion for decades. "Good morning, Mr. Broderick." Chloe Peterson's cheerful voice rang out across the nearly empty diner. The 17-year-old waitress bounced over to his table, her ponytail swinging, order pad already in hand. "The usual?" Tank's eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled at her. "You know me too well, Chloe." His voice was soft but clear, carrying the gentle weight of his 84 years. "One black coffee and the sunrise special coming right up." She flashed him another bright smile before heading to the kitchen, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. Tank settled into the familiar red vinyl booth, his gaze drifting to the quiet street outside. Millbrook, Texas was just beginning to wake up, with a few early morning workers hurrying past the diner's large windows. The small town had become his sanctuary after a lifetime of shadows and secrets. The other regulars at Murphy's saw only what Tank wanted them to see: a quiet elderly veteran who kept to himself, someone who might have served in Vietnam or Korea. They had no idea that the man who methodically cut into his eggs every morning was once known as the Ghost of Kandahar, the most decorated Special Forces operative in military history. Chloe returned with his coffee, setting it down with the careful attention she always showed him. "Here you go, Mr. Broderick. Your breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." "Thank you, sweetheart." Tank wrapped his calloused hands around the warm mug, appreciating how Chloe treated him with respect, rather than the condescension some showed to elderly folks. The bell chimed again, and Tank's keen eyes, still sharp despite his age, caught sight of Rebecca Chen entering the diner. His late wife's niece spotted him immediately, her professional demeanor softening into a warm smile as she made her way to his booth. "Mind if I join you?" Rebecca asked, though she was already sliding into the seat across from him. At 45, she carried herself with the composed grace that made her such an effective director at the VA clinic. "Since when do you need to ask?" Tank's dry humor showed in the slight quirk of his mouth. Rebecca studied him with the same careful attention she gave her patients at the clinic. "You're looking well, Uncle Frank, but I noticed you missed your checkup last week." Tank sighed, recognizing the concern behind her professional tone. Rebecca was the only person in Millbrook who knew his true identity, the weight of the medals locked away in his home safe, the classified missions that had saved thousands of lives. She had appointed herself his guardian since Marie's passing 3 years ago, watching over him with the same determination her aunt had shown. "Been feeling fine," he assured her, though they both knew his definition of fine had been shaped by decades of military service. Just didn't see the need. Chloe appeared with his breakfast plate, steam rising from the perfectly cooked eggs and crispy hash browns. "Can I get you anything, Doctor?" "Chen?" "Just coffee, thanks, Chloe." Rebecca waited until the waitress had moved away before leaning forward slightly. "You know, it wouldn't hurt to let people in a little more. The senior center has some great programs." "Rebecca." Tank's voice was gentle but firm. "I appreciate the concern, but I'm comfortable with my routine." She sat back, watching as he began to eat with the same methodical precision he applied to everything. His piercing eyes might have softened with age, but they still held the sharp awareness that had kept him alive through countless missions. To most people in Millbrook, he was just another elderly veteran living out his quiet retirement. But Rebecca saw the tactical genius and fierce protector beneath the unassuming exterior. "Marie wouldn't have wanted you to be so isolated," she said softly. Tank's fork paused halfway to his mouth. The mention of his late wife still had the power to catch him off guard, even after 3 years. "She understood me," he replied finally. "Just like you do." Rebecca reached across the table to pat his hand, a gesture that would have surprised anyone who knew how rarely Tank allowed physical contact. "I just want you to be happy, Uncle Frank. You've given so much. Maybe it's time to let yourself receive a little in return?" Tank nodded, but his attention had already shifted to the window, his training never fully dormant. He watched the small town coming to life, content in his chosen anonymity. For now, at least, he was just another face at Murphy's Diner, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The peaceful morning shattered when the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the air. Through Murphy's Diner's large windows, Tank watched 5 heavily tattooed men dismount their bikes, their leather vests displaying the Iron Serpent's coiled snake emblem. His trained eye immediately identified their leader, a scarred man whose very presence seemed to darken the doorway as he entered. The diner fell silent. Chloe froze behind the counter, her face draining of color. An elderly couple quickly paid their bill and hurried toward the exit, keeping their heads down as they passed the bikers. "Ladies and gentlemen," the leader's voice carried across the diner with practiced menace, "I'm Vince Castellano, but you can call me Razor." He smiled, revealing a gold tooth. "We're here to discuss business with the owner." Murphy himself emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands nervously on his apron. "Mr. Castellano, I told your men last week, times are tough." "Times are always tough," Razor cut him off, running a finger along the counter and examining it with exaggerated disgust. "That's why businesses need protection. Accidents happen. Health inspectors can be particular." He glanced meaningfully at the kitchen. $500 a week ensures nothing unfortunate occurs. Tank sat quietly in his corner booth, watching. His hands remained steady around his coffee cup, but his mind was already cataloging threats, angles, exits, habits that had kept him alive through decades of combat. "Please," Murphy's voice shook. "My margins are already thin. I can't." One of Razor's men knocked over a napkin dispenser, sending it crashing to the floor. The sound made several customers jump. "That's just a small example," Razor said. "Things break so easily these days." A large man with a graying beard, Razor's lieutenant, whom the others called Bull, began walking between tables, stopping at each one to stare down the occupants. When he reached Tank's booth, the old veteran didn't look up from his coffee. "Hey, old-timer," Bull growled. "This booth is needed for official business. Move it." Tank took another sip of coffee. "I'm comfortable here, son." The diner grew even quieter. Bull's face darkened. "I don't think you heard me, Grandpa." He leaned down, his massive frame casting a shadow over Tank's table. "Move. Now." Tank finally looked up, his piercing eyes meeting Bull's. "I heard you fine, and I'm staying right here." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion for those watching. Bull's hand shot out, grabbing Tank's collar. With a violent shove, he sent the elderly man sprawling onto the hard linoleum floor. Tank's cane clattered away, and his head struck the ground with a sickening thud. "Uncle Frank!" Rebecca's cry cut through the shocked silence as she rushed to Tank's side. Tank lay still, blood trickling from a cut above his temple. His dog tags had broken free from beneath his shirt, scattering across the floor with a metallic sound. One of the younger bikers picked them up, glancing at them before tossing them dismissively beside Tank's prone form. "Just another worn-out old soldier," the young biker sneered. "Should have shown some respect, Pops." Chloe had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Other customers sat frozen, their eyes averted from the scene of casual brutality. Rebecca pressed a napkin to Tank's wound, her hands shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. Razor surveyed the scene with satisfaction. "Let that be a lesson," he announced to the silent diner. "The Iron Serpents demand respect. Murphy, you have until Friday to get your first payment together." He turned to leave, then paused. "And someone clean up this mess. Bad for business having bleeding old men on the floor." The bikers filed out, their laughter echoing as they mounted their motorcycles. The sound of engines faded into the distance, leaving behind a diner full of shaken people and one elderly veteran lying wounded on the floor. "Someone call an ambulance," Rebecca called out, still pressing the rapidly reddening napkin to Tank's head. Murphy hurried over with a first aid kit, his hands trembling. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Broderick. I never thought they've been pressuring businesses all over town, but..." Tank remained still, his eyes closed, looking every bit his 84 years. Blood matted his thin white hair, and his breathing was shallow. The decorated warrior who had once been the ghost of Kandahar now appeared exactly what the bikers had seen, a vulnerable old man who had dared to defy them and paid the price. Chloe knelt beside him, picking up his scattered dog tags with shaking hands. "Will he be okay?" she asked Rebecca, her voice barely a whisper. In the distance, sirens began to wail, growing louder as they approached Murphy's Diner, where an old soldier lay defeated on the floor, and the morning's peaceful routine had been shattered by violence. As Tank lay on the cold linoleum floor of Murphy's Diner, his right hand slowly moved inside his weathered jacket. To anyone watching, it looked like an old man clutching his chest in pain. But his calloused fingers found the small device he had carried for over 40 years, an emergency beacon no larger than a silver dollar, its presence a constant reminder of the secrets he still carried. 300 miles away, in the Secure Operations Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a red light began flashing on a dusty console. The young communications officer stared at it in confusion before checking his manual. His eyes widened as he read the classification level. "Sir," he called out, "we have an active Guardian Angel beacon." Colonel James Hartwell looked up from his paperwork, his coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips. "What's the identifier?" "Sierra 7 Ghost, sir. It's coming from Texas." Hartwell's face drained of color. He knew that code. Everyone in Delta Force knew that code. "Dear God, that's Tank Broderick." Back in the diner, Razor kicked over a chair as he stalked between tables. "Let this be a lesson to everyone here. When the Iron Serpents make a request, you comply." He grabbed a coffee pot and poured its contents over an elderly woman's breakfast. She whimpered, but didn't dare move. Tank's fingers pressed the beacon twice, the signal for immediate danger to civilians. The device gave a faint vibration, confirming transmission. At Fort Bragg, Hartwell was already mobilizing his teams. Operation Guardian Angel is now active. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. He grabbed his secure phone. "Get me General Morrison at the Pentagon. Authorization code Delta 9 Ghost." The operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Decades ago, the military had established Guardian Angel to protect retired operatives who carried sensitive information. Tank Broderick carried more secrets than any other living operative. "Sir," a lieutenant reported, "we have 2 Special Forces teams ready for immediate deployment. Texas National Guard units are being alerted, and we have surveillance drones diverting to the target area." Hartwell nodded grimly. "Tank Broderick trained me 25 years ago. If he's activating that beacon, civilians are in danger." He pointed to a map. "Get those teams in the air now. I want boots on the ground in 90 minutes. In Murphy's Diner, Bull Morrison grabbed Chloe's arm as she tried to help Tank. "Leave him there, sweetheart. Old man needs to learn his place." Rebecca's voice shook with anger. "He needs medical attention." "He needs to mind his own business," Razor sneered, sweeping dishes off a nearby table. The crash made everyone flinch. Just like everyone else in this town needs to mind theirs. Tank's breathing remained measured, despite the blood trickling down his face. His left hand still pressed the napkin to his head wound, but his right thumb continued working the beacon, sending detailed status updates in the old combat code. 3 clicks, armed hostiles. 2 slow, 1 fast, 8 to 12 civilians present, 4 rapid, immediate response required. The signals reached Fort Bragg in real time. Hartwell watched the decoded messages appear on his screen, pride mixing with concern. Even bleeding on the floor, he's still gathering intel. He turned to his communications officer, "Alert local law enforcement to stand down when we arrive. This is now a federal operation." 2 Black Hawk helicopters thundered to life on the Fort Bragg airfield, their rotors cutting through the morning air. Elite operators checked their weapons one final time as they received their briefing. Many had trained under Tank, and all knew his legend. "The Ghost of Kandahar needs our help," Hartwell told them over the radio. "Let's show him Delta Force still remembers its debts." In the diner, Razor was working himself into a rage, throwing chairs and threatening customers. "Anyone else want to be a hero like Grandpa over there?" He kicked Tank's fallen cane, sending it skittering under a table. "No? Smart choice?" Tank's fingers never stopped moving, continuing to transmit vital intelligence. 4 clicks, pause, 3 clicks, hostiles armed with concealed weapons. 2 long holds, ringleader identified. His decades of training turned fear into data, danger into actionable intelligence. Military transport planes were already thundering through the sky, carrying vehicles and additional personnel. National Guard units across Texas received encrypted orders, establishing a perimeter around Millbrook without raising suspicion. Surveillance drones silently took position high above the town, their cameras focused on Murphy's Diner. "Teams will be on target in 60 minutes, the operations officer reported. Hartwell strapped on his tactical vest. "Make it 45. I'm going in with them." He checked his watch, remembering Tank's first lesson from decades ago. "Speed saves lives, son, but precision kills enemies." "Sir," his executive officer protested, "regulations state—" "Tank Broderick saved my life in 3 different countries," Hartwell cut him off. "He's the reason I'm standing here. We're doing this by the book," he wrote. In Murphy's Diner, as Razor and his men continued their rampage, none of them noticed the slight smile that crossed Tank's bloodied face. His fingers tapped out one final code, ready for action. Razor paced the diner like a caged animal, his boots crunching on broken glass. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, casting prison bar shadows across his scarred face. His men had spread throughout the restaurant, keeping the terrified customers trapped in their seats. "Anyone else getting hungry?" Razor sneered, picking up a plate of abandoned pancakes. He dropped it in an elderly man's lap, making him flinch. "Eat up, Gramps. Show us how much you're enjoying your breakfast." From his position on the floor, Tank watched every movement with calculated precision. His military-trained mind cataloged each biker's position, their weapons, their body language. Most importantly, he noticed the growing tension between them. Chloe Peterson couldn't stand it anymore. Despite Rebecca's warning grip on her arm, the teenage waitress pulled free and hurried toward Tank with a clean napkin. "Please, let me help him. He's bleeding." Razor spun around, his face twisted with rage. "What did I say about the old man?" His hand shot out, catching Chloe across the face with a vicious backhand that sent her sprawling. The diner fell deadly silent. Even Razor's men looked uncomfortable. But it was Tank's eyes that changed. The gentle, grandfatherly look vanished, replaced by something that made Bull Morrison take an involuntary step back. Those eyes had once made hardened terrorists drop their weapons in the mountains of Afghanistan. They were the eyes that earned him the nickname Ghost. "You know, Razor," Tank's voice carried clearly despite its softness, "your men seem awful nervous about that bag Bull's carrying, the one with today's collection money." Razor's head snapped toward his lieutenant. Bull clutched the leather bag tighter. "Shut up, old man," Razor growled, but Tank saw the seed of doubt take root. "Just saying," Tank continued mildly, dabbing at his head wound. I noticed him counting something in his truck earlier. Probably nothing. Bull's face reddened. He's lying. I wouldn't. Nobody accused you of anything, Tank interrupted smoothly. Yet. Two other bikers exchanged glances. Tank had spotted their weakness the moment they entered, a gang held together by greed and fear rather than loyalty. You've got some mouth for a beaten old man, Razor snarled, but his eyes kept darting to the bag. Tank shrugged. Age teaches you to notice things, like how your friend Snake over there keeps checking his phone. Expecting an important call, son? Snake jumped, shoving his phone deep into his pocket. Just checking the time. Sure, Tank nodded thoughtfully. Nothing to do with that private meeting you had with the Golden Knights last week? The words hit like a bomb. The Golden Knights were the Iron Serpent's bitter rivals. Tank had overheard the local sheriff discussing gang tensions just yesterday. What meeting? Razor's voice was deadly quiet. He's messing with us. Snake's protest came too quickly, too loudly. Tank slowly sat up, his movements stiff but deliberate. Interesting that you didn't deny having the meeting. Razor grabbed Snake by his leather jacket. You've been talking to those knights behind my back? No, I mean, it wasn't what you think. From his corner, Tank watched the paranoia spread like a virus. His words were carefully chosen ammunition, striking at the weak points in their alliance. He'd used these same tactics to dismantle terrorist cells, turning conspirators against each other without firing a shot. While we're clearing the air, Tank added casually, you might want to ask Joey why he's been making those trips to Austin. The ones he doesn't tell you about. Joey's face went pale. How did you... Trips? Razor's paranoia was in full bloom now. What trips? Just visiting my sister, Joey protested. Bull snorted. You don't have a sister. The Iron Serpents were turning on each other like hungry wolves. Tank's psychological warfare was working exactly as planned. He'd learned long ago that fear of betrayal was more destructive than any physical attack. You're all acting mighty suspicious, Razor shouted, his authority crumbling. Anyone else got secrets they want to share? Tank's voice remained calm, grandfather gentle. Secrets like the real reason the police never touch your operations? The envelopes you deliver to the mayor's house every month? Several bikers stared at their leader in shock. Tank had simply guessed about the corruption. It was common in operations like these, but Razor's expression confirmed it. Nobody's supposed to know about that, one biker whispered. Seems like a lot of things nobody's supposed to know, Tank observed mildly. Makes you wonder what else your friends aren't telling you. The Iron Serpents were now openly glaring at each other. Alliances formed and fractured in seconds. Trust, already fragile, shattered completely. Razor's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Everybody shut up. And you, he pointed a trembling finger at Tank, one more word and... Or what? Tank's deadly eyes locked onto him. You'll prove them right about your leadership? The question hung in the air like smoke, poisoning every breath. Tank watched his psychological warfare take full effect, turning predators into paranoid prey. His body might be old, but his mind was still the weapon that had earned him legends in places history had forgotten. Rebecca Chen pulled into the diner's parking lot, immediately noticing something was wrong. Through the windows, she saw leather-clad bikers looming over terrified customers. Her heart stopped when she spotted Tank on the floor, blood trickling from his temple. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her VA clinic badge and pushed through the door. The bell's cheerful jingle felt out of place in the tense atmosphere. This is a private party, lady, Razor sneered, moving to block her path. Turn around and walk out. Rebecca met Tank's eyes across the room. In their years of friendship, she'd learned to read his subtle signals. The slight tilt of his head told her everything she needed to know. It was time. I'm not going anywhere. she said clearly, her voice carrying through the diner. "Not while you're threatening these people. Especially not while you're threatening him." She pointed at Tank. Razor laughed. "The old man? Lady, you should worry more about yourself." Rebecca straightened her shoulders. "That old man is Master Sergeant Franklin Broderick, the ghost of Kandahar." The name landed like a thunderclap. Several older veterans at the counter sat up straighter, their eyes widening in recognition. "You're lying," one of them whispered. "The ghost is just a legend." "No, he's not." Rebecca's voice grew stronger. 3 years ago, when terrorists took over that girls' school in Afghanistan, who do you think saved those children? The official report said it was a team operation. The truth? It was one man. Tank went in alone. The diner fell silent. Even the bikers stopped their threatening moves, confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. 48 terrorists eliminated in a single night, Rebecca continued. Not one child harmed. The survivors spoke of a shadow that moved without sound, a ghost that appeared and disappeared like smoke. They surrendered without firing a shot, just from looking in his eyes. An elderly veteran stood up slowly, staring at Tank with newfound recognition. "I served in Kandahar. We all heard the stories. The ghost was the most decorated Special Forces operative in history." Tank remained silent, but his eyes met Rebecca's with a mix of resignation and understanding. She had been his wife's final gift to him, a niece who would watch over him and know him for who he truly was. "That's why he lives so quietly here," Rebecca explained, her voice softening. "After losing my aunt, his wife, he wanted peace, but he never stopped protecting people. It's who he is." The customers began looking at Tank differently. The teenage boy who had been cowering behind his mother now stood straighter. The elderly couple by the window clasped hands, their fear replaced by determination. "This is garbage," Razor spat, but his voice wavered slightly. "Some fairy tale about an old man?" A truck driver stood up, his massive frame towering over the nearest biker. "My brother served, said the ghost saved his entire unit from an ambush, said he moved like nothing human, took out 20 enemy fighters without making a sound." More customers rose from their seats, the retired school teacher who came every morning for coffee, the construction worker who always ordered extra bacon, the young mother who brought her kids for Saturday breakfast. Their fear was transforming into something else: pride, determination, solidarity. "You want to hurt him?" the truck driver growled. "You'll have to go through us first." Tank's eyes crinkled slightly, a tactical signal Rebecca recognized. He was using the civilians' protective instincts as part of his strategy, letting their courage unnerve the already paranoid bikers. "Sit down," Razor shouted, but his authority was crumbling. His men looked increasingly uncertain, glancing between their leader and the growing number of standing customers. Rebecca moved closer to Tank, kneeling beside him. To others, it looked like she was checking his wound. In reality, she was positioning herself according to his subtle hand signals. "The Delta Force team is 4 minutes out," she whispered, so softly only he could hear. "Colonel Hartwell himself is leading them." Tank's expression didn't change, but his finger tapped twice against the floor. Acknowledged. The diner had transformed. What started as a scene of intimidation had become something entirely different. The customers who minutes ago were victims now stood as protectors, forming a human barrier between Tank and the bikers. They understood now that they were in the presence of a legend, a hero who had spent his life protecting others. Razor's men shifted nervously, no longer the predators they'd imagined themselves to be. They were starting to realize they had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple protection racket in a small Texas town. Through it all, Tank remained calm, his tactical mind coordinating every element, each person's position, every angle of approach, all the potential threats. He processed it all with the same brilliant strategic thinking that had made him a legend. Rebecca watched him work, marveling at how even now, at 84 years old, he could control a battlefield without seeming to move at all. The ghost of Kandahar was about to remind these bikers why some legends should be left in peace. Razor paced the diner floor, his face twisted with rage as his control slipped away. "Nobody's leaving!" he shouted, grabbing elderly Mrs. Thompson by her thin arm. "Everyone sit down or the old lady gets hurt." Tank's eyes narrowed slightly as he watched 3 more bikers grab hostages: the teenage boy, the young mother, and the truck driver. His fingers moved in precise patterns against the floor, spelling out military code that Rebecca translated without looking down. "You think you're tough?" Razor dragged Mrs. Thompson toward Tank. "Let's see how legendary you are when I start breaking fingers." Tank pushed himself up slowly, blood still trickling from his temple. "Let her go," he said quietly. "Your quarrels with me." "My quarrels with anyone who doesn't show proper respect." Razor shoved Mrs. Thompson aside and stormed toward Tank. The first punch caught Tank in the jaw, snapping his head back. He stumbled but stayed standing. His fingers kept moving, signaling positions and instructions to Rebecca while everyone focused on the violence. "Not so tough now, are you?" Razor landed another blow, this one to Tank's ribs. The old soldier grunted but remained upright. Rebecca fought to keep her face neutral as she decoded his signals. 4 hostages, 7 hostile combatants, 6 exits. Tank was systematically positioning people through subtle gestures and meaningful glances, creating a complex tactical formation that only a trained eye could see. "You want to be a hero?" Razor grabbed Tank's shirt. "How about I show everyone what happens to heroes?" Tank absorbed another punch, but his eyes stayed sharp. His left hand dropped to his side, fingers moving rapidly. Rebecca read the message. "Delta Team 3 minutes out. Position civilians for extraction." The diner's customers, though terrified, began responding to Tank's subtle guidance. A slight nod sent the construction worker 2 steps left. A quick glance moved the retired schoolteacher closer to the kitchen door. Each small movement was part of a larger strategy that the bikers, focused on their leader's display of dominance, failed to notice. "Look at you," Razor sneered, landing another blow that sent Tank staggering against a table. "Some legend. You're nothing but a broken-down old man." Tank's bloody lips curved in a ghost of a smile. His fingers spelled out new coordinates as he used his own body to draw the bikers' attention. Rebecca understood. He was deliberately taking punishment to keep their focus on him while the tactical situation shifted around them. The young mother clutched her children closer, reading Tank's subtle head tilt and moving them inch by inch toward the side exit. The teenage boy, following Tank's quick hand gesture, shifted behind the counter where he'd have cover. Every civilian was being positioned like pieces on a chessboard, guided by a grandmaster they'd never truly known until today. "Still think you're the ghost of Kandahar?" Razor grabbed Tank's throat. "Still think you can scare us with fairy tales?" Tank's next signal made Rebecca's heart skip. Prepare for breach. 2 minutes. The Delta Force team was almost in position. She caught the truck driver's eye and nodded slightly, seeing understanding flash across his face. He'd served. He knew what was coming. "You know what your problem is?" Tank's voice was quiet but clear, drawing everyone's attention. "You never learned to count." "Count what?" Razor tightened his grip. "Exits? Angles? Lines of fire?" Tank's words were punctuated by labored breaths. "You never learned to read a room." The biker laughed, but there was uncertainty in his eyes. Something about the old man's calm was unsettling. Despite the blood and bruises, Tank's gaze remained sharp, analytical. "You never noticed how everyone's moved," Tank continued, "how they're all in perfect positions for what's coming." For the first time, Razor looked around. Really looked. His eyes widened as he began to see what Tank had orchestrated. Every civilian was positioned near cover or exits. His own men were clustered in exposed positions. Somehow, without anyone noticing, the entire tactical situation had been transformed. 1 minute, Tank said softly, his fingers spelling out final coordinates to Rebecca. That's how long you have to surrender before this gets ugly. Razor's face contorted with rage. He slammed Tank against the wall, pressing his forearm against the old soldier's throat. You think I'm scared of your mind games? I'm going to make an example of you. Tank didn't resist. His eyes met Rebecca's as his fingers spelled out one last message. Hold position. Protect civilians. His willingness to sacrifice himself to keep the hostages safe was written in every line of his battered face. The customers watched in horror as Tank took more punishment, but they stayed in their assigned positions, trusting the legend who had spent his life protecting others. Rebecca's hands clenched as she decoded his final signal. 30 seconds to breach. The tension in the diner built to an unbearable level as Tank's strategy approached its culmination. Multiple elements were about to converge: the positioned civilians, the approaching Delta Force team, and the increasingly unstable bikers who still didn't understand they were standing exactly where Tank wanted them. The silence in the diner shattered as Bull Morrison stepped away from the other bikers. His weathered face showed a mix of pride and regret as he looked at Tank. I always knew you'd figure it out, old friend, Bull said, his gruff voice softening. Even after 30 years, you can still read a tactical situation better than anyone. Razor spun toward his lieutenant. What are you talking about? He's talking about Kandahar, Tank replied quietly, wiping blood from his chin. Operation Shadowfall. The mission that went wrong. Bull nodded, removing his leather vest with the Iron Serpent's patch. Master Sergeant Marcus Morrison, Special Forces Delta Team 6, he announced, standing straighter as years of undercover work fell away. Tank here was my commanding officer back then. The other bikers stared in disbelief as Bull crossed the diner floor to help Tank up. The two old soldiers clasped hands, their grip firm despite Tank's injuries. I thought you were dead, Tank said softly. After the explosion at the compound? That was the plan, Bull replied. Intelligence needed someone deep inside criminal organizations, tracking weapons shipments and terrorist connections. The Iron Serpents were the perfect cover. He turned to face Razor, his expression hardening, until they started targeting innocent civilians. Rebecca watched the reunion with tears in her eyes, understanding now why Tank's tactical signals had seemed so familiar to Bull throughout the confrontation. The two veterans stood together, their military bearing evident despite their years apart. You've been a Fed this whole time? Razor's face twisted with fury. A government spy? Intelligence asset, Bull corrected. Tracking your connections to arms dealers and extremist groups? We've been building a case for months. Tank smiled slightly, despite his split lip. Still running deep cover operations at your age, Marcus? Some things never change. Learned from the best, sir. Bull's eyes showed deep respect. Remember what you taught us? A soldier's duty never ends, it just changes form. The touching moment between the old comrades was interrupted by the sound of a gun being cocked. Razor had pulled a pistol from his jacket, his hand shaking with rage as he pointed it at the gathered customers. You think this changes anything? He snarled. I've still got hostages. I've still got the upper hand. Bull stepped in front of Tank, shielding his former commander. It's over, Vince. Delta teams are already in position. You've lost. Lost? Razor's laugh was harsh. I've got a diner full of human shields, starting with this hero's biggest fan? He grabbed Chloe, pressing the gun to her head. The teenage waitress whimpered, tears streaming down her face. Don't. Tank's voice carried the quiet authority that had once commanded elite soldiers. You're only making it worse for yourself. Worse? Razor tightened his grip on Chloe. I'm making an example. Nobody betrays me. Nobody. The other bikers looked uncertain, their loyalty to Razor warring with the revelation of Bull's true identity and the threat of military intervention. The customers remained in their tactical positions, trusting Tank's strategy even as the situation escalated. "You remember what happened in Kandahar?" Bull asked Tank, his eyes never leaving Razor. "When that warlord tried to use children as shields?" Tank nodded slowly. "I remember what you did. Fastest disarm I've ever seen." "Think I've still got it in me?" Bull's hand moved slightly, preparing. "Only one way to find out, old friend." Tank's fingers moved in a familiar pattern, spelling out coordinates. Razor saw the exchange and pressed the gun harder against Chloe's temple. "Stop talking. Both of you shut up or—" He never finished the sentence. Bull moved with surprising speed for his age, years of military training overriding his biker cover. His hand struck Razor's wrist precisely as Tank had taught him 3 decades ago, breaking the grip on the gun while simultaneously pulling Chloe to safety. The weapon clattered to the floor as Razor howled in pain. Bull secured him in a joint lock, forcing him to his knees while Tank quickly retrieved the pistol. "Still got it," Bull said with a grim smile. "Never doubted you," Tank replied, keeping the gun trained on Razor while Bull restrained him. "Though your form's gotten a little sloppy. We'll have to work on that." The other bikers, seeing their leader subdued by the 2 veterans, raised their hands in surrender. The customers let out a collective breath, the tension breaking as they realized the immediate danger had passed. Bull looked at his former commander with pride and gratitude. "It's good to be working with you again, sir, even under these circumstances." "Welcome back from the dead, Marcus," Tank said softly, gripping his old friend's shoulder. "We've got a lot of catching up to do." Razor struggled against Bull's hold, his face purple with rage. "You're both dead. You hear me? The Iron Serpents will—" Bull cut him off. "The Iron Serpents are finished," Bull cut him off. "Just like your weapons trafficking operation and your terrorist connections, it's all over, Vince." The relative calm shattered as the diner's windows exploded inward with a deafening series of pops. Glass fragments sparkled in the air as flashbang grenades rolled across the floor. Tank's military instincts kicked in instantly. "Everyone down!" he shouted, his commanding voice cutting through the chaos. "Hands over your ears, eyes closed." The customers dropped to the ground just as the flashbangs detonated. Brilliant white light filled the diner, followed by thunderous concussions that made the building shake. Through the ringing silence that followed, Tank moved with surprising agility. Razor, stunned by the explosions, lost his balance. Tank seized the moment. Despite his 84 years and earlier injuries, his hands moved in a precise sequence taught to Special Forces operators. He trapped Razor's gun arm, twisted sharply at the elbow, and sent the weapon clattering across the floor. The move was smooth, practiced, and devastatingly effective. "You still remember the counterattacks," Bull said with admiration, helping to secure Razor's other arm. "Just like you taught us." Black-clad figures burst through the broken windows and doorway. Their weapons swept the room with practiced efficiency as they secured the perimeter. Bull immediately began coordinating with the incoming teams. 7 hostiles, 3 by the counter, 4 near the kitchen, he called out, using hand signals that Tank recognized from their years of service together. Customers are friendlies, all in defensive positions. The Special Forces operators moved like shadows, subduing the remaining Iron Serpents with precise tactical efficiency. Some bikers tried to resist, but found themselves face down on the floor before they could react. Others, seeing the overwhelming force, surrendered immediately. Through the settling dust and smoke, a tall figure in combat gear entered the diner. Colonel James Hartwell removed his tactical helmet, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Tank. Recognition and respect showed clearly on his face. "Master Sergeant Broderick," Hartwell said, his voice thick with emotion. "When the Guardian Angel beacon activated, I couldn't believe it was you." Tank straightened despite his injuries, meeting his former student's gaze. "You made good time, James. though you always did excel at rapid deployment scenarios. Hartwell crossed the diner and embraced the older man carefully, mindful of his wounds. You trained me well, sir. Everything I know about tactical command, I learned from you. And now you're running Delta Force operations, Tank said proudly. Times change. Not everything changes, Hartwell replied, gesturing to where Bull was directing the tactical teams. Your training still saves lives. Your lessons still guide us. The Special Forces teams worked with practiced precision, securing weapons and restraining prisoners. The customers watched in amazement as their elderly breakfast companion commanded respect from these elite soldiers. Colonel, Bull called out, approaching with his hand extended. Marcus Morrison reporting in. Deep cover assignment finally complete. Hartwell's eyes widened. Morrison, we thought you were killed in action. That was the plan, Bull explained. Tank figured it out, though. He always could read a tactical situation better than anyone. The three men shared a moment of understanding, their military bonds transcending the years of separation. Around them, the operation continued smoothly as the Iron Serpents were led away in restraints. Chloe emerged from behind an overturned table, staring at Tank with newfound appreciation. You really are a hero, she said softly. All this time, you were just pretending to be a regular customer. Tank shook his head. I am a regular customer. I just happen to have some specialized training. Specialized is an understatement, Hartwell said. The Ghost of Kandahar is a legend in Special Forces. Your techniques are still taught at Fort Bragg. The other customers gathered closer, their fear replaced by awe as they realized the full extent of Tank's military background. Rebecca moved through the group, checking injuries and helping those still shaken by the flashbangs. The situation is contained, sir, one of the operators reported to Hartwell. Perimeter is secure, and local law enforcement has been briefed. Tank watched the professional efficiency of the teams with approval. You've built a fine unit, James, though they could work on their entry timing a bit. Hartwell laughed. Still critiquing our tactical performance after all these years? Old habits, Tank replied with a slight smile. And old soldiers never really retire. We just find different ways to serve. Bull nodded in agreement, standing shoulder to shoulder with his former commander. Different ways to protect people who need protecting. The morning sunlight streamed through the broken windows, glinting off tactical gear and scattered glass as the Special Forces teams completed their operation. The diner, which had started the day as a simple breakfast spot, had become the scene of an extraordinary reunion between soldiers bound by duty, honor, and shared sacrifice. Razor's twisted laugh cut through the tactical chaos. His hand slipped inside his leather vest, revealing a crude, explosive device strapped to his chest. Red numbers on the digital display blinked ominously. Nobody's taking me alive, he snarled, his finger hovering over the detonator. You want to play hero, old man? Let's see how you handle this. Tank's combat-trained eyes assessed the situation in microseconds. The blast radius would encompass most of the diner. Chloe huddled behind the counter with other customers. Rebecca tended to an elderly woman near the kitchen. Bull and the Special Forces teams were too far away to intervene. Time seemed to slow as decades of tactical experience crystallized into a single, crucial moment. Tank didn't hesitate. He'd spent his entire life protecting others. This was no different. Everyone out, now! Tank's voice carried the authority that had once commanded elite operators in the world's most dangerous places. He locked eyes with Bull, communicating volumes in that brief glance. Bull understood immediately. Clear the building, he shouted, coordinating with the Special Forces teams to evacuate civilians. Move, move, move! Razor's thumb pressed down on the detonator. Tank launched himself forward with surprising speed, wrapping his arms around the younger man. The impact drove them both to the floor, Tank positioning himself to shield others from the inevitable blast. Tank! No! Rebecca screamed, trying to rush forward. Bull caught her arm, pulling her toward safety. Get her out! Tank ordered, his voice steady despite the countdown ticking in his ears. He could feel Razor struggling beneath him, but Tank's grip was fueled by something stronger than mere physical strength: the unwavering determination to protect innocent lives. The explosion ripped through the diner with devastating force. Tank's body absorbed the worst of the blast, protecting those still evacuating. The shock wave shattered what remained of the windows and sent tables flying. Smoke and debris filled the air as parts of the ceiling collapsed. Through the chaos, Bull directed the Special Forces teams with practiced efficiency. "Secure the perimeter. Medical team, front and center. We need immediate evacuation." Rebecca broke free from Bull's grip, rushing toward the epicenter of the explosion. Her medical training took over as she knelt beside Tank's motionless form. His clothes were burned, and blood seeped from multiple wounds. But she found a pulse, weak but present. "Stay with me, Tank," she whispered, beginning emergency treatment. "You don't get to leave us like this." Colonel Hartwell coordinated with the incoming medical evacuation team while Bull helped secure what remained of the blast site. Razor hadn't survived the explosion, but his final act of violence had failed to claim the innocent victims he'd intended. Chloe pushed through the gathering crowd, tears streaming down her face. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked Rebecca, her voice trembling. "He saved us. He saved all of us." Rebecca worked steadily, her hands sure despite her emotional turmoil. "He's fighting," she replied, monitoring Tank's vital signs. And Tank's never lost a fight that mattered. The medical evacuation team arrived with stretchers and emergency equipment. They worked quickly, stabilizing Tank for transport, while Rebecca rattled off his vital signs and injuries. The other customers watched in respectful silence as their elderly breakfast companion, now revealed as a true hero, was carefully moved to the waiting helicopter. "I'm going with him," Rebecca announced, her tone brooking no argument. She climbed aboard the medical transport, never letting go of Tank's hand. Bull watched the helicopter lift off, his weathered face showing deep concern. "He didn't even think twice," he said to Colonel Hartwell. "Saw the threat and acted, just like he always did." "That's who he is," Hartwell replied, watching the helicopter disappear into the distance. "The finest soldier I've ever known, and an even better man." The gathering crowd of townspeople stood in stunned silence, processing what they'd witnessed. The quiet veteran who'd sat in the same booth every morning, who'd always had a kind word for Chloe and a generous tip, had risked everything to save them. "I didn't even know his real name until today," one customer said softly. "All this time, we had a genuine hero right here among us." "That's exactly why he is a hero," Bull responded, his voice carrying to the gathered crowd. "He never needed recognition. He just did what was right, no matter the cost." The morning sun illuminated the damaged diner, casting long shadows through the smoke-filled air. Emergency vehicles arrived with their lights flashing, but the real emergency had already passed, thanks to the sacrifice of an 84-year-old veteran who proved that true courage knows no age. Tank was alive, but badly injured, having once again placed himself between innocent people and those who would harm them. His decision had been instinctive, immediate, and entirely in character for a man who had spent his life in service to others. The white walls of Rebecca's VA clinic felt different from the sterile hospitals Tank had known during his service years. Sunlight streamed through the window, casting a warm glow across his bed as he slowly opened his eyes. His body ached from the explosion, but the pain medication kept the worst of it manageable. Rebecca stood by his bedside, checking his vital signs. "You gave us quite a scare there, Tank," she said softly, adjusting his IV drip. "But you're going to make it." Tank tried to smile, but even that small movement hurt. "Couldn't let those folks get hurt," he mumbled. "They're good people." Outside the clinic's window, he could see the growing crowd of townspeople gathering with flowers and handmade signs. Word had spread quickly through Millbrook about the elderly veteran who turned out to be the legendary Ghost of Kandahar. The local newspaper's headline read, "Hero Among Us. Legendary Special Forces operative saves local diner." Mayor Thompson had already visited 3 times, each time with grander plans for parades and ceremonies. "The whole world should know about your heroism," the mayor had insisted enthusiastically. But Tank just shook his head. "Don't want any fuss," he told Rebecca. "Never did this work for recognition." Rebecca squeezed his hand gently. "I know, Uncle Tank. But these people care about you. They want to show their appreciation." The door creaked open, and Chloe Peterson poked her head in. The teenage waitress's face lit up when she saw Tank was awake. "Can I come in?" she asked timidly. Tank's weathered face softened. "Of course, sweetheart." Chloe pulled up a chair beside his bed, her eyes brimming with tears. "I brought you something," she said, reaching into her backpack. She pulled out a college acceptance letter. "I got in. Full scholarship." Tank's eyes crinkled with pride. "That's wonderful news, Chloe." "I wouldn't have applied if it wasn't for you," she said, wiping her eyes. "All those morning talks we had at the diner, when you told me I was smart enough to dream bigger. You believed in me, before anyone else did." Rebecca watched the exchange with a warm smile, seeing how Tank's quiet influence had touched lives long before his heroic actions at the diner. Outside, reporters from national news networks had begun arriving in Millbrook, eager to interview the legendary operative who had emerged from retirement. Their satellite trucks lined the quiet streets, but Tank refused all interview requests. "The only story that matters," he told Rebecca, "is how this town gave an old soldier a home when he needed one." Throughout the day, a steady stream of visitors filled his room. Mrs. Murphy from the diner brought his favorite apple pie. The regulars from his morning coffee group came by with cards and well wishes. Each visitor had a story about Tank's quiet kindness, how he'd helped fix a broken-down car, or listened when someone needed to talk. Colonel Hartwell visited again, this time with official papers. "The Pentagon wants to hold a ceremony," he explained. "Present you with another medal." Tank shook his head. "Already got enough medals gathering dust," he said. "Rather stay here with my family." He looked meaningfully at Rebecca and Chloe. Bull Morrison stopped by later that afternoon, his undercover work finally complete. "You haven't changed a bit, old friend," he said with a grin. "Still throwing yourself into harm's way to protect others." "Neither have you," Tank replied, still sneaking around in plain sight. The 2 old soldiers shared a knowing look, decades of shared experiences passing between them without words. As evening approached, Rebecca shooed away the remaining visitors. "He needs rest," she insisted, though her stern doctor's voice couldn't hide her affection. Once they were alone, Tank reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for watching over me all these years." Rebecca's eyes softened. "Someone had to," she replied. "Aunt Marie made me promise to take care of you." Tank looked out at the setting sun, thinking of his late wife. "She'd be happy to see this," he said softly. "Me finding a family again." The town of Millbrook had transformed from a place of lonely retirement to a true home, filled with people who cared about him, not for his legendary status, but for who he was as a person. The mayor's proposed parades and ceremonies seemed trivial compared to moments like these, quiet conversations with people who had become as dear as family. Through his window, Tank could see the townspeople still gathered outside, their candles creating a warm glow in the growing darkness. They weren't there to catch a glimpse of a famous war hero. They were there to support their friend, their neighbor, their family member. In all his years of service, all the classified missions and saved lives, Tank had never felt more fulfilled than he did right now, surrounded by the genuine love and concern of his adopted hometown. The next morning, Chloe arrived at the clinic carrying a thick manila envelope. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat beside Tank's bed, and Rebecca quietly excused herself to give them privacy. "I have something important to tell you," Chloe said. her voice a mix of nervousness and determination. "I've made a decision about my future." Tank sat up straighter in his bed, wincing slightly from his healing wounds. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Chloe pulled out military recruitment papers from the envelope. "I'm joining the army," she announced, her chin lifted proudly. "Your story, what you did at the diner, it made me realize what real courage looks like. I want to serve others the way you did." Tank's weathered face softened with emotion. "That's a big decision, Chloe. Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything," she replied. "You showed me that one person can make a real difference. When you protected everyone at the diner, you weren't thinking about yourself. You were thinking about keeping others safe." Tank was quiet for a moment, studying the young woman who had become like a granddaughter to him. "Being scared doesn't make you any less brave," he said softly. "Every time I went into combat, I was terrified, but there were people counting on me." He reached for the small wooden box on his bedside table, his hands shaking slightly as he opened it. Inside lay his purple heart, its purple and gold surface gleaming in the morning light. "I want you to have this," Tank said, carefully lifting the metal. "I got this in Afghanistan, protecting a village from insurgents. Got shot twice, but we saved 37 children that day." Chloe's eyes widened. "Tank, I can't take this? It's yours?" "A medal's just a piece of metal," he said, pressing it into her hands. "What matters is what it represents. Courage isn't about not being afraid, Chloe. It's about protecting others despite your fear. That's something I see in you." Tears spilled down Chloe's cheeks as she carefully held the purple heart. "I'll make you proud," she whispered. "You already have," Tank replied, his voice thick with emotion. The door opened, and Bull Morrison walked in, his large frame filling the doorway. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Chloe wiped her eyes and stood up, hugging the metal close. "I should go. I have forms to fill out." She kissed Tank's cheek before leaving. "Thank you. For everything." Bull watched her go, then turned to Tank with a knowing smile. "Looks like you're still recruiting, old friend." "She did that all on her own," Tank replied. "Got more heart than I ever had." The two veterans spent the next hour planning their future. Bull had officially retired from undercover work, and they discussed opening a security consulting firm together. "We've got too much experience to let it go to waste," Bull said. "Plus, it'll keep us busy enough to stay out of trouble." "Speak for yourself," Tank chuckled. "I'm thinking about settling down." As if on cue, Rebecca entered the room carrying fresh bandages. Her presence brought a warmth to Tank's expression that Bull couldn't miss. "About time you two figured things out," Bull said with a grin. "Marie would approve, you know." Rebecca blushed as she checked Tank's wounds. Their relationship had evolved naturally from caregiver to something deeper, built on years of trust and understanding. "Someone has to keep him from running into any more explosions," she said, but her gentle touch on Tank's arm spoke of deeper feelings. "I'm not going anywhere," Tank assured her, covering her hand with his. "Got too much to live for right here." Bull stood up, squeezing Tank's shoulder. "I'll leave you two alone. Got some paperwork to file for our new business venture anyway." After Bull left, Rebecca sat on the edge of Tank's bed. "You gave Chloe your purple heart," she said softly. Tank nodded. "That medal's been sitting in a box for decades. Now it can inspire someone who'll do good with it." "You've given her more than just a medal," Rebecca said. "You've shown her what real heroism looks like, not just at the diner, but every day. How you treat people, how you put others first." Tank looked at Rebecca, seeing the same kindness in her eyes that had first drawn him to her Aunt Marie. "I spent so many years alone after Marie died," he said. "Didn't think I deserved another chance at happiness." Rebecca leaned forward and kissed him softly. "We all deserve happiness, Tank. Even legendary war heroes." Outside the window, they could see Chloe showing the Purple Heart to her parents, her face glowing with pride and purpose. Tank watched her, knowing that his legacy would live on not through medals or newspaper headlines, but through the lives he had touched and the people he had inspired to serve others. 6 months after the diner incident, Tank and Bull stood outside their newly renovated office building on Main Street. The simple sign above the door read, Broderick and Morrison Security Consulting, Veterans Helping Veterans. Not bad for 2 old war horses, Bull said, admiring their handiwork. The building had been transformed from a rundown storefront into a welcoming space where veterans could find help transitioning to civilian life. Tank nodded, leaning slightly on his cane. His injuries had healed well, but Rebecca insisted he use the cane on long days. Marie would have loved this, he said softly. She always said I needed a proper job after retirement. Inside, they had created a comfortable meeting area with soft leather chairs and military memorabilia on the walls. But it wasn't about glory or war stories. It was about healing and moving forward. Their first client of the day was a young Marine, recently returned from overseas with haunted eyes that both men recognized all too well. Tank sat with him while Bull made coffee. The hardest part isn't the fighting, Tank told the young veteran. It's coming home and feeling like you don't belong anymore, but you do belong, and we're here to help you find your place. Across town, the courthouse was packed as Judge Martinez handed down sentences to Razor and his surviving Iron Serpents members, 25 years for attempted murder, terrorism, and racketeering. The town could breathe easier knowing justice had been served. Later that afternoon, Tank and Rebecca walked to Murphy's Diner for lunch. The place had become an unofficial veterans gathering spot, with a wall of photos showing military members from the community. Tank's picture hung there too, though he'd only agreed after much persuasion. "Look who's here," Rebecca said as they entered. Chloe stood at their usual booth, dressed in her Army training uniform. She was home on a brief leave before heading to advanced individual training. "Private Peterson," Tank said proudly, embracing the young soldier. "How's the Army treating you?" "Tough, but good," Chloe replied, touching the Purple Heart pin on her uniform. "My drill sergeant couldn't believe I got this from the ghost of Kandahar himself." They settled into the booth, their booth, where everything had started. The diner's owner, Murphy, brought over coffee without being asked. Other veterans began dropping by their table, sharing stories, and seeking advice. It had become a daily ritual. "Remember when you used to sit here alone?" Rebecca asked Tank quietly, squeezing his hand under the table. Tank looked around at the faces of people who had become his family. Bull arguing good-naturedly with a Navy veteran about military branches. Chloe showing her training photos to an elderly World War II veteran. Young service members seeking guidance from older ones who'd walked their path. "Wasn't really living back then," Tank admitted. "Just existing." Rebecca leaned against his shoulder. Their relationship had deepened naturally, built on years of trust and understanding. She'd moved into his small house last month, bringing warmth and life to rooms that had been too quiet for too long. "You've given them all something precious," she said. "Hope, purpose, community." Tank watched as Bull helped a veteran fill out job applications, sharing contacts from their growing network of veteran-friendly businesses. Their security consulting firm had become more than just a business. It was a mission to ensure no veteran felt lost or alone after serving. "Got a letter from Colonel Hartwell yesterday," Tank said. "Fort Bragg's implementing some of our transition program ideas. Says it's making a real difference." Rebecca smiled. "You're still saving lives, Tank, just in a different way now." The afternoon sun streamed through the diner's windows, catching the silver in Tank's hair. At 84 years old, he'd found a new kind of peace, not in the silence of isolation, but in the warm buzz of community. Chloe came back to their table, excitement in her eyes. "I've been accepted for Special Forces training," she announced. "Following in your footsteps, Tank." "Make your own footsteps," Tank advised, his voice gentle but firm. "That's what really matters." As the day wound down, Tank looked around at what his life had become. The diner full of veterans supporting each other. Bull, his brother in arms, finally at peace with his past. Rebecca, who had brought love back into his life when he thought those days were over. And Chloe, carrying forward the values of service and sacrifice to a new generation. His most crucial mission hadn't been in some distant battlefield. It had been here, in this small Texas town, protecting and inspiring the people who needed him most. In his twilight years, Tank had found something he never expected. Not just purpose, but family. The legendary ghost of Kandahar had finally found his way home. If this one resonated with you, stick around. I've got another story waiting for you tomorrow, and who knows, it might be just what you needed to hear.